What's going on, everybody? My name is Monotui, coach of the Tampa Bay Luxrays, and today I'm bringing you guys a video that's a little bit late. It's been a while since the GBA ended, but I figured I'd make one anyway. I did want to make one, but I just never ended up getting around to it. This is going to be the GBA Season 6 end of the season recap video. Now, there are a couple things I want to talk about. The team that I inherited, how each of the games went, and a couple other things. So I guess we'll just start off by getting into, a little bit of background. So for those who maybe did not hear or did not watch GBA for whatever reason, which I imagine most of you have because that's where most of my subs came from, I ended up inheriting Gubstacular's team, or Gubstastic's team, week 2. He played week 1 and then quit, and then I was the coach who took over. So I didn't get to draft my own team, but I did take over what I think many would consider a pretty good team. I'll get into the things I liked about it and the things I didn't like about it in a little bit. But yeah, that's just a little bit of the background. I took over a team week 2. We started out 0-5 because Gubs ended up losing against Chimpact 5-0, which definitely hindered us throughout the season, or at least hindered our outcome. But it's not, there's nothing we can do about that. It's not our fault. It's not really his fault either. It's a Pokemon game. He lost a Pokemon game. Oh well. So there's that. But I guess now we'll just get into the team a little bit. So the team will be popping up right over here. Or actually, it's already on your screen. I don't know why I said it'd be popping up, but team's right over here. Garchomp, Azumarill, Mega Manectric, Mandibuzz, Amoonguss, Bronzong, Emboar, Piloswine, Porygon-Z, Hitmonchan, and Acelgor. So, also just something to note. Originally, I had, Gubs had Gigalith instead of Hitmonchan, and then he had Lantern instead of Piloswine. I made the Hitmonchan switch pretty much as soon as I made the team, just because even though I think Gigalith is kind of cool and definitely has some potential, I didn't want it at the time. It didn't fit the team, I felt, and I definitely wanted Hitmonchan over that as a sense of rapid spin, as well as an additional fighting type, some more priority, which is always nice. And then I dropped Lantern for Piloswine. Lantern's not necessarily a bad Pokemon either, I just didn't enjoy using it necessarily, and I'm a little bit more familiar with Piloswine. Plus, it's a secondary ground type, so electric types that are running HP Ice cannot touch it. Of course, they'd be running HP Ice from Garchomp. It's also an additional Stealth Rocker, which I like to have. I like to have at least 3 typically. Synergize nicely with the team. It was a reliable ground type. It did do some work throughout the season, which is kind of nice. But yeah, that's that. I forget when I picked that up. I think I might have picked that up week 7, week 8, somewhere around there. But anyway, things that I really liked about the team. I liked the type synergy. It wasn't necessarily the best, but it was definitely solid. You had the Dragon Fairy Steel, which I liked a lot. You had good wall breakers. You had some very nice speed, which I always like to have. I do like having a reliable ground type, at least one reliable ground type. I ended up getting 2, which is nice. Had a decent amount of priority, had some bulk. There were a couple things I liked in particular, definitely Garchomp. Garchomp has become now one of my favorite Pokemon in draft format just after using it for this season. It has a lot of potential in the format. It is very strong, puts in a lot of work in a lot of different games. It can do a bunch of different things. It's very versatile, and it was just really solid throughout the season, and I really enjoyed having it. Similar thing with the Azumarill. Didn't do amazingly for me, but I definitely enjoyed having it. I know it's a very scary thing to prep for. Mega Manectric, I actually thought I would hate going into the season just because I'm not that big a fan of Mega Manectric. It was definitely solid. Being able to get up a positive differential at the end of the season, being a good fast electric type, electric fire coverage is really, really good, and then we'll force whatever hidden power, you typically ice. Mandibuzz was okay as well. Not necessarily amazing. As you can see, it went 1-10 throughout the season. Not that I think that's a direct correlation between how good it is, but Mandibuzz was definitely solid, very bulky to be able to take hits. I hate that it's weak to rocks, because after rocks, a lot of different things will be able to 2-hit KO it. And it is a pretty solid defogger, but I don't typically like to bring defog on my teams, because I'm more of the hazard stack type person. And I don't like to waste turns getting rid of hazards when I can just be setting them up on my opponent's side or dealing with them in other ways. But Mandibuzz is definitely solid. It stopped a lot of different teams from bringing setup mons versus me, because obviously it's very bulky and it has foul play. It could gain some good initiative in some games with U-turn. It did what it did pretty well. After that, we got Amoonguss. Amoonguss is also really cool. I like the ability to put things to sleep. I ran foul play on this thing a lot, just to prevent setup, and it was able to hit things like Latios super hard, Scavalier pretty hard. things like that. Bronzong also, I do enjoy very much as a Pokemon. I wish it had some sort of recovery, but of course it did not. Very good Stealth Rocker, very bulky Pokemon. Very good ability, a lot of resistances, a lot of things that this thing can check defensively, which is nice. And against certain matchups, like against Nick, it actually put in a lot of work, or not a lot of work, but it actually put some pressure on offensively, which I thought was really, really cool. Emboar. Emboar is a mon I think I kind of underutilized this season. Like, I know how good Emboar is. There are very, very few things in the game that aren't 2-hit KO'd by this thing, but I only brought it to 4 games. I'm not 100% sure why. I think mainly just because either I didn't think it had the best matchup versus a certain team, or I thought something else had a little bit of a better matchup, but it's definitely not a bad Pokemon at all, and I kind of wish I used it more. Definitely came through versus John by critting Latios, but we'll get to that when we get to that game. But Emboar is definitely really cool. I think I could have used it a little bit more often and maybe a little bit better, because it definitely is super solid, and I would definitely recommend picking it in the draft, because you just put it on a team and it kills things. It's also very scary to prep for a lot of teams. Like, you have to check this thing offensively, you can barely switch into it, which I guess was part of the problem why I didn't want to bring it, because a lot of teams had good offensive checks to it. But regardless, it is what it is. It served me well in a couple games, and I was very glad to have it. After that, of course, we do get to Pilot Swine. Only brought it to a couple games, but in the games that I came to, I believe it helped out a lot. I forget the first game that I brought it to. It'll be on the right, and we'll talk about it when I get there. But versus George, it was pretty nice to have. Being able to roar the Manaphy when it went for sub was huge, because that could have gotten a few kills versus my team. And it is a very reliable Stealth Rocker, like I mentioned. Ice Shard priority was really nice. Just the dual stab also is kind of nice. There isn't too much else to say about it. It was a solid Pokemon for my team, even though it didn't come too often. Porygon Z has also become, not necessarily one of my favorites, but after using it, this mon's a lot of fun. I was able to put on a ton of offensive pressure to a lot of teams. It was a very good Scarfer. I typically ran it Scarfed. I think I ran it once Life Orbed and then once Spexed, but it was definitely a very solid Pokemon versus a lot of different teams. It was relatively fast at base 90. It has very, very powerful Tri-Attack, which is really nice, and I really liked. The thing I liked about this thing the most is a lot of times I would just have to run 2 moves, and then I could fill in whatever I wanted in the other 2. So I'd have Tri-Attack and then something to hit Ghost types, and then maybe I'd toss on an Ice Beam or Thunderbolt if I needed, and then I could throw on Trick or something like that. So it was a really cool mod to have. I'm really glad I got to use this thing, because this is always a mod that I've always kind of wanted to use, but I never it wasn't something I directly looked at while drafting. And getting to use it was really, really cool. And it was definitely a lot of fun, definitely put a lot of pressure on the teams. Hitmonchan. I maintain that Hitmonchan is much better in the format than it is standard, even though I only brought it once. But the one game that I did bring it did put a lot of pressure onto George. I believe the entirety of his team had absolutely no switch into it, which is really nice. I never ended up using it as a Rapid Spinner like I kind of intended earlier on in the season, but that's totally fine. It does have reliable priority. I think this mod does have a lot of potential in the format, especially as a very cheap mod. It's definitely something I can recommend picking up. I think it's tier 4. It's a solid fighting type. It's got loads of priority. It can be an agility sweeper, power-up punch if you want to. It's just a solid mod, and I liked it, even though I only brought it once. Like the games that I wanted a fighting type, Emboar was a little bit more suited, or my opponent had a good bulky Psychic, or something along those lines. So I do maintain that it is pretty good. Again, I didn't really find the opportunity to use it too often during the season, but hey, it came to one game, and it did its job one game, so I can't complain about it. And then the next mon on the list is Acelgor, and Acelgor is also a mon I do enjoy a lot in the format. I think it's pretty solid. The speed is super nice, just being able to outspeed pretty much everything in the game, even including a couple Scarfers. I'm pretty sure it outspeeds base 80 Scarfers. Was able to help me out a lot versus teams like Lars and John. John, it was really nice because Hazard Stack was a big part of me being able to beat him, and then versus Lars, it was actually a very nice Scarfer being able to outspeed and knock out Mega Alakazam and then picking off Crawdon on the following turn. So Acelgor is definitely really cool. I don't know if I like it as much now as I did then, just because there are other Spikes users I like to pick up. I prefer bulky Spike users, but Acelgor was definitely really solid. It still is a very viable Spike user as well. It's got very solid coverage, can hit things surprisingly hard. Of course, the speed is its biggest asset, And yeah, that was just a really nice mod for my team in general, and that completes each individual mod on the team. I guess we'll talk about what I felt about the team as a whole. So I want to go on record by saying I don't dislike any of the individual mods that were thrown here. Mods I did kind of dislike before I inherited this team, I grew to like a bit, including Mega Manetric and Mandibuzz. So I just want to get that out of the way, but there were a couple things about this team I just did not enjoy. For one, and this isn't the biggest complaint, but the speed tiers were kind of awkward. So it went from a Selgor at 145, which is great, and then Mega Manetric at 135, which is great, and then dropped all the way down to Garchomp at 102, which is totally fine, but I prefer having, well, those speed tiers and then maybe like a 110 somewhere in the middle like that, just because if my opponent has anything like a base 120, they can run a lot of bulk onto it, they can run a plus attack nature or something like that, and that kind of gives my opponent a little bit easier team building abilities. My biggest complaint with this team is that, bar a few examples that I gave earlier, it was super one-dimensional, at least for my standards. Like, you can go at the top, Garchomp, okay, it's very versatile, definitely really solid. Azumarill is relatively versatile, and then after that you have Mega Manetric, which does the exact same thing every single week. It'll be Thunderbolt, Volt Switch, Fire Move, Hidden Power, maybe Signal Beam if you feel like running it. You got Mandibuzz, which is going to be run as a bulky pivot, except for the one time where I ran it as a Scarfer and I ended up getting paralyzed, switching into, as Hemvee switched into his Ampharos, which is unfortunate. A Moongus is also going to be like a bulky pivot. It's going to take hits from things, it's going to put things to sleep. Dual Stab, Foul Play, Spore, maybe a Toxic. Assault Vest also is a viable set, but I never found the opportunity to use it. It's very one-dimensional. Bronzong is kind of versatile, and I don't think I maximize its versatility. Like, it can be offensive Trick Room, can also be a bulky Pokemon, can switch into a lot of hits, is a very reliable Stealth Rocker, but there are limits to what this thing can do, and like the versatility kind of comes a little bit short on this thing. Kind of the same thing with Emboar, even though you can run a bunch of different sets of this thing, like Choice Man, Choice Scarf, maybe like Flame Charge, you prep for it the exact same way you would if it were any other set. So like you would prep for the Banded set very similarly you would to the Scarf set. And once you figure out this thing's item, it's a lot easier to deal with. Granted, again, it's still a super scary Pokemon to prep for, and it is very difficult to play against. It tears up slower teams. The Scarfer set can deal with offensive teams. It's just, again, not the most versatile thing on the planet. Same thing with Piloswine. Like, I don't have to go too much into example on Piloswine, unless you're running like a Curse sweeping set of Piloswine. You know it's going to be just a bulky Pokemon meant to switch into most electric types, take a couple unstab hits from things, or like take a couple neutral hits from things, fire off attacks, set up rocks, maybe roar something out, but again, it's not super versatile. PZ can definitely be versatile. Like, you can run Double Dance, and you can run Specs, and you can run Scarf, Silk Scarf, something along those lines. You can even run like a 3 attacks recover set. I never found the opportunity to, and this is probably more my fault than anything else, but I never found the opportunities to make this thing work as anything else other than a Scarfer. I never found the opportunities to use this thing a little bit differently. Like I said, for most games, this was my choice Scarfer. Just being able to revenge kill things, sometimes wall break. The one game I did bring Specs, that was mainly just to break through some of the bulkier things on Nick's team, and then against one team I brought Life Orb, and that game I should have brought Specs anyway, because the thing that ended up killing me was a Scarfed Medicham, along with Dragonette's Mega Altaria, and Scarf would have been really nice versus that team. So, like, it is definitely versatile, but not the most versatile thing, and with my team, I felt like I needed it to be a Scarfer more often than not, or a choice user more often than not. I could have been wrong about that. Maybe a different coach would have used this thing a little bit better than I did. Maybe he would have built a different team around it so that it could be a little bit more versatile, but I know personally, with my experience using it, I wasn't able to find too much wiggle room with that. Hitmonchan is surprisingly like kind of versatile. Like, it has bulk up and it has agility and has a lot of priority. It can be offensive with Life Orb, can be Assault Vest, so it has a lot of different options going for it. But it's, at the end of the day, even though I do like this Pokemon a lot, Hitmonchan is not ever going to put up gigantic numbers, so even though it is kind of versatile, not the best Pokemon individually. And then a Selgor was kind of versatile, because like I threw a Scarf onto it one time. I think one time it had a Life Orb, and the other two I think were Focus Sash leads versus John. So But again, like, not, you know what it's going to do. It's either going to spike stack or it's going to be offensive and try and kill things. So that's really my biggest complaint with this team, is that it just was very predictable, I feel, for my opponent most of the time. Like, if you were a smart coach, and I've been told this by some of the other coaches as well, it was relatively easy to figure out what sets I was going to bring. So which is why versus other teams, like versus MV and versus George, I tried to mix things up the best that I could so that I can throw them off. And unfortunately, neither of the times that I did that, it ended up working out. But that's that. Overall, again, I do kind of like this team. Like, it's not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. I definitely really like each, not necessarily really like, but I definitely like each individual mon that was thrown onto this team. I just didn't like, I like having my teams with more of an option for creativity, and maybe if someone else had this team, then they would have been able to do that, but for me, building each week was just kind of difficult, just because I tried to come up with different, unique things to beat my opponents, and it was just not coming up for me. Like, even when I was building with Kyle, who is essentially my front office, but he's just one guy, like, when I was building with him, it just became very difficult in order to, like, be creative with this team, because I feel like each individual mon, or almost every individual mon, is relatively straightforward. But again, that could have just been me. If you had this team, maybe it would have worked better for you. I don't know. That being said, again, not a bad team. But with that out of the way, let's move on. Oh, okay, I traded Lantern week 7, so that's good to know. Moving on, we're going to go off into each individual game that we ended up playing. So like I said, week 1, we didn't end up playing. That was Gubbs, and he ended up losing 5-0 versus Chimpact, which not only sucked because we're starting off our season minus 5-0-1, but I also really wanted to play Chimpact because I know how good of a player he is, and that would have been really cool, but unfortunately we were unable to get that opportunity. Week 2, we ended up playing Tom of the San Jose Sharpedos, and this was a really good game to start our season off with because we ended up winning 4-0. Azumarill put in a lot of work, was able to clean up. Bronzong was able to knock out the, I believe, Mamoswine after getting his Colberberry popped, which was really nice. I got a very good sense of how the team functioned. Like, I could use Mandibuzz as a bulky pivot, U-turn on predicted switches, and then go out into big wall breakers like Azumarill or Porygon Z, which is really, really nice. So that was definitely a really nice game for me to get accustomed to the team I had. It was also nice because I was a little bit afraid matchup-wise versus Tom, because this team definitely has good fairy checks in Bronzong and Amoonguss, but certain Sylveon sets would be able to beat both of them, sort of. Like, if I'm like a Combine set, since I wasn't running Clear Smog, Sylveon might be able to beat me. Bronzong could possibly have gotten worn down, and it was threatened by a couple other things on his team, but thankfully I was able to maintain Bronzong long enough. I was able to beat the Sylveon, and I was able to beat the rest of his team, which was very nice. This is when my enjoyment for Mega Manectric started, because he didn't bring a ground type and I could just spam Volt Switch. I outsped everything on his team bar the Mega Aerodactyl, which he was never switching in on Mega Manectric, and I did have reliable switch-ins too, or at least one reliable switch-in in Bronzong anyway, which is very nice. So this was a really good game for me to get accustomed to the team, and I did enjoy using the team that I built versus Tom. It ended up working out very well. I thought I really liked this team. Then week 3 came around and we were playing John. And this was a really, really good game. This is still one of my favorite league matches to date. There was very little hacks involved in the game. It was back and forth the entire time. Essentially, well, also my prep ended up working out, which is really nice. Like, I had Protect on a Selgor, which was super useful for blocking Mega Lopunny's Protect. So I was able to get up my Rocks and a layer of Spikes. And this was just like a super fun game to play. Like I said, back and forth throughout the entire game. And then towards the end, essentially what happened was, I thought I had the game in the bag because John, like, never in his life brings Magikarp Reuniclus, and then he sends in Reuniclus and it doesn't take Rock and Spikes damage, and I'm like, oh shit, he's gonna be Trick Room, isn't he? And he does. He goes for the Trick Room, as I believe I switched in my Azumarill, and I make a bit of a misplay, and I don't go for Aqua Jet because I was afraid of, for whatever reason, him having Acid Armor, and he just bops me with a Life Orb Thunder, and I was like, oh shit, I think I've lost. And then my only option at that point, since he was under Trick Room, was go out into Emboar and click Sucker Punch and hope that it killed from about 80% or wherever he was at. And thankfully, it was a roll in my favor to kill, and I did fortunately get that roll, and I was able to knock him out. And then I was able to beat Escavalier and Gastrodon with what was it? With Amoongus, which was really solid. So after I took out the Reuniclus, I knew I had won, but all throughout that match, it was intense. My hand was shaking, my heart was racing. I feel like those are lyrics to a song, but regardless, that was a super fun game, and that game, especially that particular win, because I know how good of a coach John is, really made me feel like I belonged in this league, and it really made me excited for matches to come because the competition in this league seemed really, really solid, and I was really looking forward to it, and that ended up being true. The next game that we ended up playing was week 4. We had Lars, and that was also a very close game, but I feel like I had a little bit of the momentum the entire time. It wasn't a lot of momentum, but there wasn't really a point in that match where I was like, shit, I'm gonna lose. It was like every time Mega Alakazam came in, I knew I had a little bit of a problem, but I knew that I had the offensive checks and then the defensive check in Amoongus in order to win that game. So essentially how this game went was, it was relatively, like I said, relatively close. I got some early momentum. I believe I got Hazards up early. I can't exactly remember. He brought a very annoying and very clever set on his part, an Assault Vest Sheer Force Druddigon, which was meant to take on a lot of different things on my team. Like, it wasn't 2-KO'd by Porygon 2, Mandibuzz couldn't really beat it, Selgor couldn't beat it, Bronzong was not 2-KO'd, thankfully, but couldn't beat it. And then there was Mega Manectric, which it walled a good portion of my team, and I really just had to play around it kind of smartly, as well as being able to pivot around it cleverly. So, I know I clicked Volt Switch on it. I went into Mega Manectric, got the Intimidate off, Volt Switched out into, I think, like a Amoongus to take the hit, which was Rocky Helmet, and then I got more chip damage off onto it, and then I switched back out into Mega Manectric on the Fire Punch, took that hit, and then hit him with an HP Ice, as I believe he switched out, which meant that he would take more rocks damage on the way back in, so I was able to whittle that thing down nicely. And then later on in the game, he finally confirmed he was Assault Vest when Porygon Z's Tri-Attack was unable to kill it, which was a little bit scary, but I knew because I had Scarf to Selgor, I still had my check to Mega Alakazam in the back. And essentially what ended up happening was, I believe what ended up happening was it was Mega Alakazam versus Amoongus. And I knew I needed Amoongus so that I could check the Crawdaunt, because I knew at that time it was banned in Crawdaunt. So he could lock himself in a knockoff, but then my Selgor can revenge kill him, or he could lock himself in the Aqua Jet, in which Amoongus walled it. So it was Mega Alakazam versus Amoongus. I switch out into my Porygon Z as fodder, so that I could get a free switch out into my Scarf to Selgor, because at that point he had Mega Alakazam and the Crawdaunt left. So I go out into my Scarf to Selgor. He either sacks off his Alakazam in order to get a free switch out into his Crawdaunt, but then he's abandoned Crawdaunt, so if he clicks Aqua Jet, he kills my Selgor, but then he can't kill Amoongus, and if he clicks Knockoff, he just doesn't knock out my Selgor, because I killed him first. Or he switches out into his Crawdaunt, stacks that, goes back out into Mega Alakazam, gets Regenerator, but that's still not enough to save him, and Bugbuzz would have been able to knock him out. So I essentially put him in checkmate towards the end. And that was just also a very fun match. I was kind of proud of myself for how well I thought things through till the very end. Definitely a very solid game, though. I felt like my prep that game was also very solid, even though, again, there wasn't anything too special about it, other than Scarf for Selgor. It was a lot of fun. Week 5 then comes around, and this game was pretty heartbreaking. We ended up losing 4-0, but if you remember from the game, if you did watch it, we did have an opportunity to win with Sub Salic Garchomp. We clicked Sub, our Salic Berry activated as Fortress exploded, and then he went into his Infernape. If he was not Choice Banded, then we would have been able to survive the Mach Punch and then sweep through the rest of the team that he had left. Because I believe at the time, Snorlax was either dead or seriously weakened. I know he was not Scarf Latias, he was no longer Scarfed Gardevoir, not that it would have mattered, he had Nidoqueen left. We O-code all of those different things, but unfortunately he did have Choice Banded Infernape, and he was able to knock out our Garchomp, and then we just had no offensive presence left, and he was able to clean up the rest of our team. Basically just switching around, and then towards the end game, I maybe made a couple dumb plays that cost me a little bit of differential, but in the whole grand scheme of things, it didn't really matter. Also, we brought Perish Trap Azu, mainly for the Melodic, and he didn't end up bringing Melodic, which really sucked for me as well, because like then it was just useless. It wasn't completely useless, I guess, because it could have trapped like maybe Gardevoir or Snorlax or something like that, but it just ended up doing like very little. So that kind of sucked. Also, Lantern did absolutely nothing, which, you know, didn't help me let me like Lantern anymore. And yeah, he also had not defensive Latias, but a bulky enough Latias to the point where like Flare Blitz, even though it was a 2 KO, obviously he outsped me and he had Roost, so I wouldn't be able to KO it. I'd just be killing myself as he healed himself, which is unfortunate. I wish I brought something like Head Smash and I clicked it on a Roost, but I was unable to do that. And George prepped very, very well. He played exactly how he needed to in order to win, and our one chance at victory fell a little bit short because he did bring Bandit Infernape and ended up picking it off. So that was also a very good game, even though I don't necessarily enjoy the result. It was a long game, it was an intense game up until I lost my Garchomp. Then we have week 6, which was a confidence booster, especially after the previous week. We ended up going against Nick, Super Blah, and this game was very quick. It was a very offensive game, and it was a game that I was pretty nervous going into, because I thought a lot of his team was super scary, but him not bringing Skarmory was really, really nice for me, because that allowed Garchomp to be a massive threat. He had absolutely no ground resistance. The only thing that really wanted, well, there's literally nothing on his team, bar maybe like a physically defensive Mega Venusaur, that wanted to switch into Garchomp. And because I did bring Choice Scarf Garchomp, it outsped everything on his team, bar a possible Scarf Jolteon, which he didn't bring, and then a possible Scarf Alakazam, which he didn't bring. So this, let me think about the team that I brought. I know I brought Hidden Power Fighting Mega Manectric, which looking back was kind of silly, but I didn't want Kieran Black to be able to set up a sub on me for free. I brought Bronzong, which was mainly there for things like the Mega Venusaur as well as the Alakazam. I did bring a Selgor as well. That was a sashed Spikes. Actually, it may have been Life Orb. I forget if that was Life Orb or sashed a Selgor in order to start setting up Spikes, but it was definitely there and it was very helpful. Scarf Garchomp, like I said, biggest win condition. Specs PZ, this is the week that I brought Specs, and it was able to 2 KO Mega Venusaur. I made a good offensive switch into it. I was able to get a ton of damage off onto it. And then Mandibuzz was there. I don't remember if it did anything this game. Oh yeah, no, that's right. Mandibuzz was able to take a +1 Ice Punch from Feraligatr and knock it out, and then I could go out into Garchomp and Revenge Kill it. So Mandibuzz had a big role in this game. Like I said, very, very offensive game. Kind of similar to the game versus Lars. I feel like I had momentum, but only like a little bit of momentum the entire match. Like at any point it could have gone the other way, but fortunately it kind of stayed in my favor through the entirety of the match. And I think the score could have been bigger, but I'm a little bit fuzzy on this one. It was a very quick game, but I do know that Garchomp was able to put in a ton of work. I think I made like a dumb play not clicking Earthquake at one point, which if Alakazam was not sashed, it would have been a bad play, but it didn't end up mattering anyway. I think a Selgor at the end, weakened the Jolteon a little bit, and then Manectric came in, and then it took a hit, and then it died to Life Orb, if I remember that correctly. Very fun game, for sure. This was also, like I said earlier, this is a big confidence boost, because Nick is a former champion. I know that Nick is a very, very solid battler, and I was able to defeat him, which felt really good, honestly. Like, I know how solid Nick is, and his team was super scary, and I was able to overcome that and just take the win. And that felt really, really good, and that gave me a lot of confidence driving forward. However, after that game, things started to fall apart a little bit. We're going to go now to Week 7, where we ended up playing Dan A-Drive of the New York Metapods, and this was a bit of a heartbreaking game. This was the game that I mentioned earlier. I should have brought Scarf PZ, but I ended up bringing a Life Orb one, because I wanted the extra damage output versus his team. It didn't end up really helping me out very much. Early game, this game was really good, because I think I led with Bronzong. He led with something like Rotom Wash or whatever. He was forced to Volt Switch out into Victini as I set up Stealth Rock, and then he goes for a sub. I click Earthquake. I was an Akaberry Bronzong, so I didn't care what he did to me, and I was totally cool with getting rid of Victini. So he set up a sub. I Earthquaked, and it broke a sub, obviously. And then he follows up with the V-Create. I live it because of my Akaberry, and I'm able to just miss out on the KO on Victini. But then after that, I was able to easily Revenge Kill it with, I believe, my Garchomp. Then later throughout the game, he did a very, very good job of getting chip damage off with knockoff. I remember, I believe he knocked off my Mandibuzz, and he knocked off my Amoonguss, which were crucial because he was able to get rid of my recovery, and that was especially crucial on Amoonguss because Amoonguss was one of my 2 Mega Altaria counters. When he got rid of Bronzong earlier on, he got rid of one of them, and when he knocked off my Amoonguss and then burnt it, he crippled the other, and he was setting himself up very cleverly for the Mega Altaria sweep, which did end up happening later on in the game. And so I'd give full props to Dan. He really played that one well. Towards the end, it was also, like, basically how this game went was I started off really strongly, and then I was gradually losing that momentum throughout the game, and then I pretty much lost the game when I made a double switch out into, I believe, my Porygon Z, as his Medicham just went for another high jump kick and knocked me out, and at that point I didn't have the power to beat his team, and Dragonite's Mega Altaria was able to just sweep right through me. So that was definitely a very good game. Props to Dan again. Went well at the very beginning, gradually lost it, and then it was gone once the double did not go my way. So that was that. Then comes week 8 versus Sam, and this game was also pretty disappointing. I wasn't too upset by the loss because I was, like, at the time I was at Nationals and, like, meeting a bunch of people that I've wanted to meet for a very long time. But it was also like, damn it, I was this close, and it's like, wait, like, I was behind for a little while, and then it looked like I was pulling it back, and then he's like, nope, Scarf Dragonite, which was, like, Shoddy's idea, and so he can fuck off and die somewhere. But this was a game where it was a little bit hacksy. Like, I know he burnt my Mandibuzz, and then he, like, I couldn't predict him, I think. No, that was my TPL game versus Sam. Well, although I kind of couldn't predict him either, because I was Power Up Punch Azumarill, and I know, like, that didn't work out as I wanted it to. He predicted my Bronzong switch in, and he went for Shadow Ball with his Kyurem, which is a really good play, because that's, like, my only switch into Bronzong. Because, like, Pilot Swan doesn't want to switch into Dragon moves very much. And then I remember he, like, missed a Draco Meteor as I went into, I think this was Bronzong. It was either Bronzong or Pilot Swine, and that sucked for me. No, it was Bronzong. And then that sucked for me because I couldn't get up Stealth Rock afterwards, which would have been really useful, especially considering the thing that beat me was Dragonite. But also because I don't think he would have been able to defog at that point, but, like, still a very good game overall. It looked like I was going to be able to pull it back with offensive Acelgor, but then, again, just, like, Scarf Dragonite just ruined my dreams, which is also my fault, because, like, you look at my team, I have an Azumarill, I have Pilot Swine, I have Bronzong, I have Mandibuzz. It looks like Outrage is not that spammable. It doesn't really look like much on his team is that spammable, or it doesn't really look like much that it can do is super great versus my team, but he was able to pull it out, and he was able to pull it off very well. Including a couple misplays that I made throughout the match, but nothing major. Like I said, a little bit hacksy, but nothing to take away from Sam. He prepped and played very, very solidly. And then after that, we have the rematch versus John and the New Orleans Pelipers. And this was another very, very intense game that was more hacksy than the very beginning. So there were 2 main points of hacks during this game that I want to point out. One was very early on in the game. It was Garchomp versus Lando T. I set up my Stealth Rock. He goes for Earthquake by the damage. I know he's adamant Earthquake. He cannot be anything else. And then on the following turn, I miss a Dragon Tail, which was pretty shitty because I could have saved my Garchomp. It lived a Rock Switch in, which would have been really nice. We traded Rocks at the very beginning, by the way. So that definitely sucked a lot for me. But actually, no. What happened was I clicked Stealth Rock, he clicked Stealth Rock, I clicked Dragon Tail, I miss, and then he clicks Earthquake and reveals that he's Adamant Earthquake. And then I have to take another hit in order to Dragon Tail him out, because I didn't have a good switch in at that point. I could have gone into Mandibuzz, but I didn't want to risk him going for Stone Edge on that turn, because it was a pretty obvious switch, but he just went for the safe Earthquake anyway, and it ended up working out for him. So that part sucked for me, because it lost me a lot of good momentum. It lost a lot of HP on my Garchomp, which was a pretty big Pokemon, and which was a pretty important Pokemon for his team. Even if I just had to use it as a sack later on, I would have totally taken that. But then that Hacks was more than made up for when he sends in his Latios behind a Reflect versus my Emboar, which I don't have a switch into. So I just go for Sucker Punch in order to put it in range of HP Ice, or not HP Ice, but put it in range of another attack later on. and then I end up critting him with Embor through the reflect and just straight up knocking it out. So he basically just lost his Latios for absolutely no reason. Like he could have, I guess in hindsight, the better play for him would have been to go out into Landorus, because at that point he clicked Earthquake and also got a kill. But if I were Scarfed and I crit him through the reflect with Flare Blitz, he would have lost his Landorus. So there wasn't really a good play in that situation. It was pretty much just pick one and then just get a kill, and not get crit. But unfortunately, that's not how the game not what the game likes to do sometimes. And then later on in the game, I'm pretty sure Mega Lopunny just missed out on a 2-hit KO on my Amoonguss by like 1%, and I was able to put it to sleep or get off crucial Giga Drain damage. And then later on, I think I was afraid that Mega Manectric wouldn't be able to knock out his Landorus with Flamethrower, but it did at also a very crucial point. Though I believe that point didn't matter as much because I knew he was Adamant Landorus and I was Timid Porygon Z, and I would have been able to outspeed him. But even with the hacks in that game, that was a very, very good game with John. John was in pretty much every game that he played. I don't think there was ever a game, maybe versus Envy or something like that, but there was every single game he was in, and he was in it to the very end, and he had a good chance in each game that he played. Maybe not a good chance, but he had a chance to win in each of his games, and I think despite his record, he played very, very well. And sometimes he got hacked, sometimes his opponent was able to overtake him, but regardless, he did very well this season, I think. But then, after that game, after that win, we move on to Envy, and the worst 3 turns I've ever had in a game, just to start this game off. So if you didn't watch this match, which I think a lot of people haven't, I think it's only got like 1,000 views, or some have like over 2,000, but this game, turn 1, it is Azumarill versus Jirachi. He's a Safety Goggles Jirachi, I don't know that, but he's not Cloverberry. I attempt to go for knockoff, he outspeeds me of course, goes for Thunderbolt, crits me, and puts me at like 6%, paralyzes me, and then gets the full paralysis. And I believe some people in my comments did the math, and there's a 0.3% chance of that happening, and that really sucked, because Jirachi was kind of a problem, and being able to not necessarily knock it out, but get a knockoff onto it and get that much damage off onto it would have been super good. Even the crit sucked too. Every aspect of that sucked. The crit sucked. The para sucked, because at that point I didn't outspeed some of the things I needed to outspeed, like Mega Ampharos, and the para sucked, or the full para sucked, because I didn't get the hit off. So that was just terrible all around. That was just absolutely awful start. And then a couple turns later, like 2 turns later, I'm in with Mandibuzz, and then I click U-turn as he sends in Mega Ampharos, and I get static paralyzed. So, and that was a Scarf Mandibuzz, which could have put in some work, but ended up not. Well, against the team of 6 that he brought, wouldn't have done a ton of work, but it still would have been cool to maybe get a kill with later on. Even if I did end up losing that game, at least Scarf Mandibuzz would have gotten a kill. But anyway, after that thing happened with Azumarill, which I guess is partially my fault, because I shouldn't have been risking my Azumarill in a time like that, even though I felt like I did my best play. I just didn't have enough offense for Mega Ampharos. I had Life Orb Garchomp, but Garchomp had too much work to do. Like, it had to deal with the Gyarados, it had to Stone Edge the Togekiss, it had to take a few hits on the Donphan, it had to knock out the Jirachi, it was threatened by the Sneasel constantly, so it was pressured to do a little bit too much offensively, and I wasn't able to keep it around enough to deal with the Mega Ampharos, and I pretty much just had to hope that he wasn't a Rest Hawk Ampharos, but he was. It's a very good Ampharos set, and he was able to beat me at the end. Also, I think at one point I was able to set up the Trick Room with my Bronzong, but I didn't have Earthquake to hit the Mega Ampharos because I had HP Electric for the Gyarados, because I didn't want to be fodder for that. But even if I did have Earthquake, Mega Ampharos would have lived, and the only way I could have won was if he got each Sleep Talk be bad, which even then I think Trick Room was ending, so he would have woken up and been able to hit me. Maybe Mega Ampharos would have been on lower HP at that point, but I still don't think I had a chance to win after after I lost my Azumarill and after I lost my 2 main ways to kill Mega Ampharos. But regardless, MB did play very well that game as well. He started off strong, and then he was able to maintain his lead with solid play and correct play, and so I can't fault him for that whatsoever. And I can't fault him for the hacks, because obviously he didn't do that on purpose. But with that being said, we then moved on to the game versus Tom, and there's not a lot to talk about in this game, because Garchomp did super good. So for one, he got misgened on his Starmie, and it wasn't faster than Garchomp. So he sent in Starmie thinking he's going to kill me. I just kill it with Earthquake. He sends in his... I think he sent in his Melodic originally, which had Flame Orb. And then I, crit his Melodic, which, I still would have been a +2 Garchomp. But I also, again, I crit his Melodic, which meant which meant I got to stay behind a sub at +2 versus anything else that wanted to come out into his team. So I think, imagine a +2 Garchomp in front of a Melodic. I crit the Melodic and kill it, which means my sub stays up. He goes into Starmie, the biggest threat to my team, to outspeed me and break my sub. I outspeed it and kill it for free, pretty much. He then has to send in his Sulk, which is Mold Breaker and not Sturdy, and knock it out with the Earthquake. Even though it was Scarfed and was able to break my sub, I just died in one hit. And then the rest of his team, in Tyrantrum, Xatu, and Gligar, is not enough to beat Garchomp. Gligar set up fodder. I continuously set up Swords Dances on that thing. Tyrantrum more than likely wasn't Scarfed, and even if it was, it had to lock itself into a Dragon move in order to kill me, in which case Azumarill comes in and clicks Pixie Play Rough and gets a kill. Or Xatu comes in and prays that I miss a Stone Edge. So, very quick game, very dominating game, all thanks to Garchomp and how that game went. Garchomp was able to put in a lot of work. And we got a 6-0 win, which was really nice. Felt good. Felt kind of bad for Tom, especially with the Starmie mishap and whatnot, but that's part of the game. You got to double check these types of things. But I'll take it. We take those, I believe the expression is. We ended up winning 6-0. And then, the final game of the season. Honestly, even though this was a loss, and this was a loss that killed my playoff chances because Dan ended up winning in the next game, this was probably my favorite game of all League format. This was an absolutely incredible game. I think both of us prepped very well. I think both of us played very, very well. There was very little hacks that influenced the match. Maybe the crit on Snorlax, as well as, of course, the last turn roll. But this was, if you haven't watched this game already, I definitely encourage you to check this out on either of our channels. It was an absolutely incredible game. I brought straight up Scarf Garchomp. Last time I brought Sub Salak. I brought an offensive Azumarill this time. I was Life Orbed instead of Perish Trap. I brought Pilot's Line, which I didn't have on my roster at the time. I brought Hitmonchan, which I didn't bring all season, and then ended up putting in some nice work as well. Got a kill on something. I don't remember exactly what that was, but it was very threatening for his team. Mega Manectric was there, didn't end up doing too much, and then Bronzong was there, and was able to get a trick off onto his Snorlax, which was really nice, because I was setting myself up for the Garchomp Sweet late game, because he didn't have a good ground resist. But obviously his team matched up pretty nicely offensively against mine as well. We had good offensive matchups versus each other this game. Infernape was not something I had switch into, and I believe he brought a Fist Plate or a Black Belt Infernape. Manaphy was a pain in the ass the entire game, not just because it's a typical Manaphy and it sets up and does things. It wasn't that big of a deal in that regard, but being able to stop my Azumarill from killing things with Aqua Jet and having me take more toxic damage, having me take more Life Orb damage, which ended up being the reason why I lost this game. Mamoswine, obviously a huge problem. I was able to play around it a little bit. I predicted knockoffs properly, I predicted earthquakes properly, but in the end, it was just able to tear through my entire team. Electabuzz, from what I remember, wasn't too bad. I do have 2 ground types on my team, and I have priority, and I had things to check it, so I don't think it's too terrible. It managed to be a semi-good Mega Manectric check for a while, but again, since he didn't have a... Well, no, he does have a ground type, but I was able to click Volt Switch on numerous things. I was able to click Volt Switch on it a couple times, gain myself momentum, and I'm pretty sure he just ended up sacking it off later on anyway, and it didn't really do much. And then Snorlax was annoying. I found out early on that it ended up being Rocky Helmet to check my Garchomp, but I was able to trick it later on. I was able to kind of deal with it, which was nice. I was able to get a free switch into Hitmonchan on it at one point, which is when it got its kill, versus I believe it was the, I forget what it was that he sacked. I think it was Fortress that he sacked, because I did have Fire Punch as well, but essentially this game I had slowly gaining momentum, and then it about equalized, and then there came a couple plays where it was 50. There were three 50-50s between my Azumarill and his Mamoswine. If I click his switch in to Aqua Jet would be Manaphy, because obviously it takes that very well and threatens me out. But if he predicts my Aqua Jet and goes into Manaphy, he takes the hit. If he predicts my Play Rough expecting the Manaphy, he can knock me out with Mamoswine, which was a very delicate situation there. The first two 50-50s in that, I got them wrong. I clicked Aqua Jet as he switched out into Manaphy, which was frustrating, but I had to keep my head. The third one was when I predicted, okay, I think he's going to go out into Manaphy one more time. I'm going to click Play Rough, and I got that one right, and I was able to knock out his Manaphy. But at that point, I had taken so much Life Orb and Toxic damage to the point where Ice Shard from Adamant Life Orb Mamoswine was a roll to kill. It was a roll in my favor. I believe I had a 63% chance of living it and being able to knock out the Mamoswine, and we would end up winning that game 0-0, and I would be guaranteed playoffs. But unfortunately, he got the roll with his Mamoswine. His Mamoswine lived on a sliver of HP, and he ended up taking that game 1-0. Like I said, despite us losing, despite the heartbreaking last turn, absolutely incredible game. And I still, to this day, occasionally rewatch that game just because of how intense it was, how well played it was, I think, from both sides. And it was just such a fun game to play in, and such a fun game to watch even to this day. But that's about it for this recap. Thank you guys for watching if you've made it this far. For those of you who also don't know, there's no guarantee that I'll be able to return to the GBA next season. I'm definitely hoping to. It was a blast. I think this league has some of the most competition throughout competitive Pokemon. It was such a fun time. I like a lot of the coaches in it. It was just, everything about it was a lot of fun. And I hope next season, for if I come back, it'll be in Sun and Moon, and I'll be able to draft my own team. And hopefully I'll be able to play a lot of these guys that I lost to, and maybe even pull out a win with a draft that I selected myself. But there's no guarantee of that. Regardless, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you're not doing so already, feel free to check out the PPL. That is currently going on. We're on a pretty good streak right now. Not necessarily a streak, but we're doing pretty good so far. Maybe not championship worthy, but we're doing very solid. So definitely check that out. There are a lot of cool people in there. I love the community. But with that being said, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.